The question that keeps coming back to me in the Nancy Guthrie case is, how did this person get into Nancy's home? And once Nancy was taken from the home, how did he get her out? Because when you look at it piece by piece, this was not just someone walking up to a door, making entry, and just leaving unnoticed. This involved timing. It involved access. It involved movement through a property. It involved avoiding cameras. And at some point, it involved getting an 84-year-old woman out of that residence and into some kind of a vehicle.
A door doesn't unlock itself. Neither does a garage. And somewhere between the moment Nancy Guthrie stepped back inside her own home and the moment she was gone, someone made a choice about which one to use. That choice is the whole case. Because whoever did this didn't just walk up, force a lock, and disappear. This required timing. It required knowing which cameras were watching and which ones weren't. It required getting an 84-year-old woman out of a house and into a vehicle without a single neighbor noticing. That's not an opportunity. That's planning. And planning means someone made decisions long before that night ever started. So today, I want to walk through the entry point in this case. Not the theories you've already heard, but the actual mechanics of how someone gets into a home like this, and what that tells us about who they were. Here's the first thing that should bother you. We have no footage of anyone entering. None. What we have is a single clip of someone on the front porch, already there. Already comfortable enough to handle the camera like it was something they'd dealt with before. That's the only visual we have of this person. Everything before that moment is a blank.
And where did the offender enter? We have no video footage of the offender entering. We only have the footage of the offender on the front porch, fooling with the camera. There's no evidence of how this offender entered the home, but it's something that we would definitely need to know, or we would like to know anyway.
Which brings us to the question underneath the question. Was someone already inside Nancy's home before she even got back that night? I know how that sounds. But sit with it for a second. Because if that's true, it changes everything about how this happened. It means the offender didn't need to force their way in during the chaos of the night. They simply had to wait. And waiting requires something a stranger rarely has: familiarity. Knowledge of her schedule, knowledge of the house. Maybe knowledge of exactly when she'd be gone, and exactly when she'd be back.
Was someone already inside Nancy's home when she returned the evening of January the 31st? This is something that I've spoke about, in the past in some of my videos. And I want to believe, I kind of believe that there was somebody already inside Nancy's home whenever she returned. Was there more than one person? This is debatable. I mean, if you think about it, how can one person pull something off like this? But then again, if there were two people or more, then by now somebody would have done leaked. Somebody would have done snitched on the other person to try to cover for themselves. It seems like they would have anyway. How was Nancy removed from this home? How? And what should investigators have been doing in those first critical hours?
Was there more than one person involved? That's the part that keeps investigators up at night. And honestly, it should keep you up too. One person managing an operation this clean, this quiet, moving a woman with mobility limitations through a property without a single mistake. That's an enormous amount of pressure for one individual to carry alone. But if there were two, there's a different problem: silence. Two people keeping a secret this size for this long without one of them cracking. That's rare. That's the kind of thing that doesn't usually hold. Ask yourself that. If you were involved in something like this with another person, how long would that silence actually last? Now let's go back to the beginning, because that's where this case has to be rebuilt from. Nancy came home that night after being out with family, sometime around 10 o'clock. That single detail, how she got back inside her own house, is one of the most important pieces of this entire investigation, and it's barely been discussed. Did she go through the garage? Did someone watch her walk inside? We know the garage opened and closed within a short window that night. Minutes, not hours. That tells us she made it in safely. But it also tells us something else. Whatever happened next happened after that door closed, which means the offender had to get in some other way, at some other time. So where? The back of the house makes sense on paper. Less visible, less exposed to the street, easier to approach without being seen. If a door back there was found propped open, that's not a small detail. That's a decision point. Was it forced? Was it already unlocked? Was it left that way for a reason unrelated to convenience?
One, the offender entered through the back. That may make the most sense from, a cover standpoint. The back of the home is usually more private, less visible from the street, less chance of a passing vehicle seeing you. And if there was a back door propped open or found open, investigators would absolutely focus on that area. What was that door forced open? Was it forced? Was it unlocked? Was it left open regularly? Family members can answer these questions. Was it propped open from the inside? Was there a reason that someone would want the door available as an exit? Because a propped door can mean several different things. It can mean that the offender used it to get in. It can mean that the offender used it to move around quietly. And it can also mean that the offender planned to come back in through that door. Or it can mean that the offender staged that door to make investigators look one direction while the real movement happened somewhere else. These are all possibilities.
Here's what I want you to really think about, because it's the kind of detail that separates an amateur crime from a planned one. Sometimes an offender damages one door, specifically so investigators focus there, while the real entry happened somewhere else entirely. A stage point of entry isn't rare. It's a tactic. And if that's what happened here, it means whoever did this understood how an investigation works well enough to manipulate it. That's not a stranger's knowledge. That's someone paying close attention. Then there are the sliders. Older glass doors that can be lifted or manipulated without much effort, if they're not secured properly. If Nancy's home had more than one, every single one needed to be checked for tool marks, prints, glove impressions, anything that says, someone was here, instead of, nothing happened here. And that brings us to the man on the porch. Watch his body language in that clip. He's not panicked, he's not rushed. He's calm, genuinely, unmistakably calm. In a moment that should be the most stressful 30 seconds of his life, if he's a stranger about to commit an abduction. That calm is the loudest piece of evidence in this entire case.
Now let's move to the porch person. Mr. Porch Guy. One of the most important things about that video is his behavior. He does not appear frantic. He does not appear panicked. He appears calm. And the calmness matters, because if he is about to enter a home where he does not belong, abduct an 84-year-old woman and leave with her, that's a high-risk act. So why is he that calm? There's a few possibilities. Maybe he's been there before. Maybe he knows the cameras. He knew where they were. Maybe he believes that the cameras were all disabled. Maybe he knew that. Maybe he knew that the subscription had lapsed. Maybe he believed that no one was monitoring the cameras. Maybe someone inside told him it was time. Maybe he believed the hard part was already done.
Because people who don't belong somewhere move differently. They check corners. They hesitate. They rush. This person didn't do any of that. Which means one of two things: either he'd been there before and knew exactly what he was walking into, or someone else had already done the hardest part of the work before he ever stepped onto that porch.
Now, the third possibility is the one that bothers a lot of people. Was someone already inside Nancy's home? I'm not saying that this is what happened, but it has to be considered, and I consider this. Could someone have entered before Nancy got home? Could they have waited inside? Could they have known that she was out to dinner that evening? Could they have known when she returned? That would require patience. It would require confidence. And it would suggest that some level of familiarity with Nancy's routine or the home itself. But here's the problem. Waiting inside a home for hours is extremely risky. The longer that an offender is inside, the more chances that they are leaving evidence. Hair and fiber and DNA, maybe even shoe impressions, touch surfaces, digital traces, noise, movement. So I'm not saying that this is the strongest theory, but investigators would still have to ask. Because in a case like this, you don't get to ignore possibilities just because they are uncomfortable.
If you noticed that stillness the first time you watched that clip, if something about it felt wrong before you could even explain why, trust that. You were reading the same behavioral cues that investigators are trained to look for. And there's the item in his hand that a lot of people have theories about. If that was a two-way radio, that's not a detail. That's a confession about coordination. Nobody needs a radio to talk to themselves. If he had one, someone else was listening. Someone else was watching the street. Someone else may have told him exactly when to move.
And that brings us to another big question. Was he alone? I've said before that this case has already felt like there may be more than one person involved. And one reason is communication. If that item seen on him was a two-way radio, that would strongly suggest coordination. You don't need a two-way radio to talk to yourself. So if he had a radio, investigators would ask, who was he talking to? Was someone already inside? Was somebody waiting in a vehicle nearby? Was someone watching the street? Was someone acting as a lookout? Was someone telling him when to move? All of this matters because the removal of Nancy may have required coordination.
One person could still pull this off, with the right equipment. A dolly, a tarp, something already sitting in that garage.
Now, could one person do this alone? Very well possible. One person with enough strength, planning, and some kind of equipment could attempt it. Maybe like a dolly, or a sheet, a tarp, maybe a wheelchair, something from the garage. But that creates more questions. Did Nancy have a dolly in her garage or around her property? Did she have a wheelchair? Was anything missing from the home? Was anything moved? Were there drag marks? Were there transfer stains?
But every version of that story raises new questions. Was anything missing from the home? Were there drag marks? Did the blood trail stop at a specific point? Because where evidence stops matters just as much as where it starts. If it ends near the front walkway instead of the back, that tells us where a vehicle was waiting, and that changes the entire shape of this case.
Was blood found only at the porch or along a route? Did the blood trail stop at a specific point? Because where the evidence stops, it can be just as important as where it starts. If the blood ends near the front walkway or near the driveway, that could suggest that Nancy was placed into a vehicle near that location, or a cart, or anything else. And this is where I think the front door becomes very important. The back may have been the best place to enter the residence, but the front may have been the fastest place to exit. Now think about it. If a vehicle pulls close to the front walkway, the distance from the door to the vehicle is shorter. Less time is exposed, less carrying, less chance of being seen, and less chance of leaving a long trail. So one possible scenario is this. The offender enters from the rear or the side. Something happens inside. Nancy is moved toward the front. The front door becomes the exit point. A vehicle is brought close. Nancy's placed inside, and the offender leaves. That does not mean that this is exactly what happened.
The front door may have been the exit, even if the back was the entry. Shorter distance, less exposure, less time carrying an 84-year-old woman across open ground where anyone could see. Which means somewhere nearby, there was a vehicle. Not maybe, almost certainly. And a vehicle means cameras, ring doorbells, business security footage, license plate readers, cell tower pinders. At 2 a.m, in a quiet residential neighborhood, a single car passing by doesn't just disappear. Someone, somewhere, has a partial answer sitting in their footage archive, and doesn't even know it yet.
But that is the kind of movement that investigators would be reconstructing. They would want to know, could a vehicle get close to the front entrance? Would the doorbell camera catch it? Could the camera have been removed or disabled before the vehicle arrived? Did the nearby cameras catch headlights? Did any neighbor cameras capture a vehicle entering or leaving? Were there tire impressions? Were there fresh tracks? Was the road surface capable of preserving tire marks? And that brings us to the vehicle. There almost had to be a vehicle. Nancy was 84 years old. This was not someone walking miles through the desert carrying her. So investigators, they would be looking for a vehicle. Not just on Nancy's property, but along every possible route from her home. They would want Ring cameras, Nest cameras, Tesla cameras. They would want business cameras and traffic cameras. They would want license plate readers and cell phone tower data. And they would want to know every vehicle that was in that area during that window. Because at that hour of the morning, traffic is limited. That can help investigators. A vehicle seen at 2 a.m. in the morning in a quiet residential area, it's more noticeable than the same vehicle at 2 a.m. or at 2 p.m. in the afternoon.
Here's the piece that should unsettle you the most. This offender either misunderstood how modern security cameras work, or he understood it perfectly.
Now let's talk about the cameras, because this offender either misunderstood the camera system or thought he had handled it. And that's an important distinction here. Because, if he believed taking or blocking a camera would erase the video, that tells us something. It suggests that he may not have fully understood cloud storage. But if he knew which cameras to avoid and which areas were dark, that tells us something else. It suggests familiarity.
If he thought disabling a camera erased the footage, that tells us he's not particularly sophisticated. But if he knew exactly which areas were dark and which ones weren't, that's familiarity. That's someone who had either been inside this property before or had access to information about it that a stranger simply wouldn't have. I'm not naming anyone. I'm not accusing anyone. What I'm doing is what any investigator has to do in a case like this. Asking uncomfortable questions because Nancy deserves the truth, not a comfortable version of it.
Now, let me say this very clearly. I'm not accusing any specific person. I'm not placing blame on the family. I am talking about investigative process. In a real investigation, the uncomfortable questions still have to be asked. Not because investigators are being cruel, not because they are accusing anybody, but because Nancy, she deserves the truth. And the truth doesn't come from skipping steps. The truth comes from going door to door, camera by camera, timeline by timeline, statement by statement.
Because underneath all of this, the doors, the cameras, the timeline, there's still a person. Nancy wasn't a case file. She was someone's mother, someone's grandmother. A woman who spent an ordinary evening out with family, came home, and never should have had to worry about what was waiting for her inside her own house.
And somewhere in all of this evidence, there is a trail. And I still believe that trail leads to a name. Nancy Guthrie, she was 84 years old. She was a mother and a grandmother. A woman who should have been safe inside of her own home. And whatever happened inside that residence, Nancy deserves better. Her family deserves answers. And the person responsible deserves to be held accountable.
Whoever did this made one mistake. They always do. Maybe it's a tire track 2 blocks away. Maybe it's a muted notification nobody's explained yet. Maybe it's a single person who knows more than they've said out loud. So tell me, based on everything laid out here, where do you think this offender actually got in? And which door do you think he used to get her out?
How do you believe that the offender got inside Nancy's home? I know none of us know, but based on what we've seen, based on what's been reported, how do you believe that the offender got inside Nancy's home? And how do you believe Nancy was removed from the home? Because until we get the answers needed to bring Nancy home, we're going to keep looking. We're going to keep digging. We're going to keep asking the questions, the hard questions.
I'll be back soon with what the timeline tells us about exactly how long he was inside that house. And that number alone might change how you see this entire case.